Last week we started our trip through the first round of speeches and responses between Job and his three friends, beginning with the long-winded Eliphaz. You know those Temanites. They never know when to shut up. If you're ever at a party and you think there's a good chance you're about to get trapped in conversation with a Temanite, you'll want to have your excuses honed and ready so as you can scoot out the door. Bildad the Shuhite is next in queue, and I'll give him this much. He knows when a speech is over, when it's time to yield the floor. Perhaps that's because Eliphaz had stolen some of his thunder, considering that most of what Bildad has to say merely corroborates Eliphaz's accusations against his friend. I'll break up the reading from time to time with some interspersed commentary whenever it seems appropriate. It would be a good idea to hold in mind at all times the fact that this first round of speeches is entirely in response to Job's lament and curses back in chapter 2. Then answered Bildad the Shuhite and said, How long wilt thou speak these things? And how long shall the words of thy mouth be like a strong wind? Doth God pervert judgment, or doth the Almighty pervert justice? If thy children have sinned against him, and he have cast them away for their transgression, if thou wouldest seek unto God betimes, and make thy supplication to the Almighty, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee, and make the habitation of thy righteousness prosperous. Though thy beginning was small, yet thy latter end should greatly increase. What Bildad seems to have said here is that the trajectory of Job's life has not been what we should expect of a truly righteous man who pleased God at all times. On this view, Job's many public displays of piety must have been a Potemkin facade. I'll bet poor old Job by now is entertaining fantasies of rearranging the teeth of some of his friends. This next bit is one of those cherry-picked texts that so many Christian apologists have made a specialty of ferreting out for a use that probably has little to do with the original intent. Here's what Bildad says. For inquire, I pray thee, of the former age, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers. For we are but of yesterday, and know nothing, because our days upon earth are a shadow. Shall not they teach thee, and tell thee, and utter words out of their heart? In other words, brothers and sisters, the old ways are undoubtedly best, and we'd be wise to listen to the counsel of wise teachers who were still wiping themselves with leaves back during the Bronze Age when people didn't know shit. But it's something I heard a lot of growing up. My particular Baptists were landmark Baptists, thereby identifying themselves as guardians of a sacred charge found in Proverbs 22:28. Remove not the ancient landmark which thy fathers have set. These were Baptists who were committed to conservatism with a capital C, maintaining the old ways at all cost. And for the founders of that sect, it basically meant keeping those people in their place so that they could go on enjoying the kind of world that their granddaddy enjoyed. I assume you know who I mean by those people. This is the argument of King James only Baptists. This is the argument of retrograde conservatives. This is the argument of those who pine away for a lost golden age that never in fact existed. This is the argument of people who aren't right in the head. Anyway, what Bildad actually appears to have done here is tried to lend a little weight of authority in advance to these proverbs that he's apparently heard from some old fart and will now recite for Job's benefit. Can the rush grow up without mire? Can the flag grow without water? Whilst it is yet in his greenness and not cut down, it withereth before any other herb. So are the paths of all that forget God, and the hypocrite's hope shall perish, whose hope shall be cut off, and whose trust shall be a spider's web. He shall lean upon his house, but it shall not stand. He shall hold it fast, but it shall not endure. He is green before the sun, and his branch shooteth forth in his garden. His roots are wrapped about the heap, and seeth the place of stones. If he destroy him from his place, then it shall deny him, saying, I have not seen thee. Behold, this is the joy of his way, and out of the earth shall others grow. I know we all found that illuminating and helpful. I wonder what poor old Job thought about that string of platitudes. Anyway, Bildad wraps it up with his final charge, which is just a little puzzling if you think about it. Behold, God will not cast away a perfect man, neither will he help the evildoers, till he fill thy mouth with laughing and thy lips with rejoicing. They that hate thee shall be clothed with shame, and the dwelling place of the wicked shall come to naught. So there it is. Job must have been wondering at this point what possessed him to befriend these three heartless imbeciles in the first place. But he makes a gallant and heroic attempt to respond to Bildad's drivel with reason, only to find himself giving it up in midstream. By the way, listen really carefully to the cosmology that's laid out in these verses. People of my acquaintance have tried to make a big deal out of this passage, just like they do with Behemoth and Leviathan later, imagining those to be biblical references to dinosaurs. Then Job answered and said, I know it is so of a truth, but how should man be just with God? If he will contend with him, he cannot answer him 1 of 1,000. He is wise in heart and mighty in strength. Who hath hardened himself against him and hath prospered? Which removeth the mountains, and they know not, which overturneth them in his anger, which shaketh the earth out of her place, and the pillars thereof tremble, which commandeth the sun, and it riseth not, and sealeth up the stars, which alone spreadeth out the heavens, and treadeth upon the waves of the sea, which maketh Arcturus, Orion, and Pleiades, and the chambers of the south, which doeth great things past finding out, yea, and wonders without number. Lo, he goeth by me, and I see him not. He passeth on also, but I perceive him not. Behold, he taketh away. Who can hinder him? Who will say unto him, What doest thou? If God will not withdraw his anger, the proud helpers do stoop under him. How much less shall I answer him, and choose out my words to reason with him? Whom, though I were righteous, yet I would not answer, but I would make supplication to my judge. If I had called, and he had answered me, yet would I not believe that he had hearkened unto my voice. For he breaketh me with a tempest, and multiplieth my wounds without cause. He will not suffer me to take my breath, but filleth me with bitterness. If I speak of strength, lo, he is strong. And if of judgment, who shall set me a time to plead? If I justify myself, mine own mouth shall condemn me. If I say I am perfect, it shall also prove me perverse. Though I were perfect, yet would I not know my soul. I would despise my life. This is one thing, therefore I said it. He destroyeth the perfect and the wicked. If the scourge slay suddenly, he will laugh at the trial of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? Now my days are swifter than a post. They flee away. They see no good. They are passed away as the swift ships, as the eagle that hasteth to the prey. If I say I will forget my complaint, I will leave off my heaviness and comfort myself, I am afraid of all my sorrows. I know that thou wilt not hold me innocent. If I be wicked, then why labor I in vain? If I wash myself with snow water and make my hands never so clean, yet thou shalt plunge me in the ditch, and mine own clothes shall abhor me. For he is not a man as I am, that I should answer him, and that we should come together in judgment. Neither is there any daysman betwixt us that might lay his hand upon us both. Let him take his rod away from me, and let not his fear terrify me. Then would I speak and not fear him. but it is not so with me. Were you able, through that thicket of archaic English, to follow the trajectory of Job's reply to Bildad? He seems by this point to have forgotten all about his interlocutor, or if he was addressing those foregoing words to his friend, that friend was probably serving as nothing more than a sounding board, for Job has by this time moved far beyond the scope of his friend's dubious counsel. It's quite clear that the rest of this speech is intended for the ears of the Almighty, his own omniscient self. My soul is weary of my life. I will leave my complaint upon myself. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say unto God, do not condemn me. Show me wherefore thou contendest with me. Is it good unto thee that thou shouldest oppress, that thou shouldest despise the work of thine hands, and shine upon the counsel of the wicked? Hast thou eyes of flesh, or seest thou as man seeth? Are thy days as the days of man? Are thy years as man's days, that thou inquirest after mine iniquity, and searchest after my sin? Thou knowest that I am not wicked, and there is none that can deliver out of thine hand. Thine hands have made me and fashioned me together round about, yet thou dost destroy me. Remember, I beseech thee, that thou hast made me as the clay, and wilt thou bring me into dust again? Hast thou not poured me out as milk, and curdled me like cheese? Thou hast clothed me with skin and flesh, and hast fenced me with bones and sinews. Thou hast granted me life and favor, and thy visitation hath preserved my spirit. And these things thou hast hid in thine heart. I know that this is with thee. If I sin, then thou markest me, and thou wilt not acquit me from mine iniquity. If I be wicked, woe unto me, and if I be righteous, yet will I not lift up my head. I am full of confusion. Therefore see thou mine affliction, for it increaseth. Thou huntest me as a fierce lion, and again thou showest thyself marvelous upon me. Thou renewest thy witness against me, and increasest thy indignation upon me. Changes and war are against me. Wherefore then hast thou brought me forth out of the womb? Oh, that I had given up the ghost, and no eye had seen me. I should have been as though I had not been. I should have been carried from the womb to the grave. Are not my days few? Cease then, and let me alone, that I may take comfort a little before I go whence I shall not return, even to the land of darkness and the shadow of death, a land of darkness as darkness itself, and of the shadow of death, without any order, and where the light is as darkness. I find myself drawing here the same conclusion I drew at the end of last week's set. Job stood at the threshold of atheism, and he'd have been well advised to step over that threshold. But of course, if he had, we'd never have had his story, because the pious weren't about to record a tale about non-belief leading to liberation. Doesn't it kind of make you wonder how many other bets the good Lord made with Old Scratch, wherein the victim just kept walking toward the only logical conclusion, and thus ceased to be useful to those who were assembling the sacred text of a religion that's all about control through terror, if necessary, apparently? If you'll indulge me, I'd like to share a few thoughts about faith and hope, two of the three theological virtues, according to St. Paul. One of these is a thought that hatched in my mind during my adolescence, but like Job, I did not have the courage to step over the threshold at that time. And it was only after 40 years wandering in the wilderness that I finally reached the long wished-for perspective that I now enjoy. My not having acted intelligently on this awareness 5 or 6 decades ago is, of course, a source of great frustration and regret to me, but after all, hindsight does not equate to foresight in reverse, and there may simply have been no direct, easy way out for me at that stage of my life. But the thought is this, at any rate. According to that same St. Paul, who listed faith among the theological virtues, it is the gift of God. There's no working it up. or as the archaic English of the King James Bible puts it, not of works, lest any man should boast. I knew both of these passages as a teenager, and I was painfully aware of never having achieved that perfect peace that allegedly comes to those whose trust in the Lord is absolute enough to be salvific. In other words, I thought there was a good chance that I was not in fact among the redeemed, despite my public profession of faith, and from that point in my life, I partitioned my hard drive to keep my left hand from knowing what the right was doing. This is the condition described by Sartre as bad faith. And it was my profession of faith and the hollow ring it had to me that led me into that condition. At that time, to speak aloud of such things would have brought censure and alienation and ridicule and punishment, and I thus learned to lie not only to others but to myself. It's one of the curiosities of my life that I for so long regretted my loss of faith, my fall from grace, as though I'd lost something precious. It's only in the rearview mirror that I understand that loss to have been a great benison, the shedding of a ruinous burden. I'm so much happier now, so much freer having faith in absolutely nothing, because faith is believing without evidence, and the world that our sciences have opened up to us is more than sufficient food for a lifetime of wonder and awe, of the joy of making discoveries. There's no point, brothers and sisters, in believing in fairy tales. I'm 71 years old. It's not unusual nowadays to hear of the death of a high school classmate. In fact, dozens of classmates from both high school and from various universities I've attended have shuffled off this mortal coil during the last couple of decades, and many were younger than I am now. News of those deaths is becoming more frequent these days. I've outlived my father by going on a dozen years, and am now the age that my paternal grandfather had reached when he returned to the dust whence he was taken. Any year now, or any month or week or day now, my passing will also be noted to a few by means of a small headline, and others will hear of it probably by word of mouth and so on, but I'll know nothing of all that, for there will be no longer any I to know it. I've processed that and more than made my peace with it. I'm not wild about the prospect of dying, which of course can be pretty horrible, but the prospect of non-existence holds no terror for me. Is in fact a matter of almost complete indifference, as much as all that time that stretched back through the eons before I became conscious of any of it. And I'm at that point in my life now when among my final thoughts will probably be the peace of knowing that this bumpy ride is almost over. Where is there room in that for the so-called virtue faith? I certainly wish I had kept better faith with some people who trusted me and found me in some respects unreliable. And the only thing I can say for myself in that respect is that with a different start in life, I'd have been a different person, which is not to excuse myself or absolve myself from anything whatsoever. But that's a different kind of faith anyway, from the one Paul is talking about here. And I've always had trouble forcing myself to believe something that deep down I find unbelievable. In hindsight, I can see that as a virtue, and its name is skepticism. And you won't find it recommended in the Bible or in any other holy book. I wish I'd stepped over that threshold. I hold hope in approximately the same regard as faith. It strikes me as useless at best and harmful more often than not. It's hope that keeps people expecting the rapture that's never going to happen, or lets them imagine that God has a plan to return Donald Trump to his rightful office, and that convinces them that when they die, they'll go to heaven where they can enjoy Granny's fresh-baked pies again, just like back in the good old days. That's sad, isn't it? grown people thinking that way? Is a nation of people who think like that really better off than a nation of non-believers who must rely on reason and empathy and evidence to reach reasonable conclusions and to govern their darker impulses? Faith and hope are a toxic brew simmering in the fevered minds of true believers, and because they cannot distinguish fancy from reality, they become a danger to us all, electing madmen to positions of awesome power, and with their anti-vax and anti-mask conspiracies run rampant, guaranteeing that we will live with this fucking pandemic for the rest of our lives. Faith and hope both. Count me out. St. Paul's third virtue, however, is a different story. I'm all for love. I think a great place to start would be by loving the minds that God or natural selection or whatever you want to call it have given us.